Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. The board did start our meeting at 6 o'clock tonight and went into executive session. We're now ready to start the public session of our meeting. So if you will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Look wherever you want.
So again, thanks for joining us. As you'll notice, we're in our new meeting space, which is at the high school, where we will continue to have our evening meetings moving forward. And I would like to thank Mr. Porter and his staff, along with Mr. Long and his staff, for getting everything ready for us in our new meeting location. As we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that as a board, all 5 of us are elected to represent our entire community, which consists of approximately 5,739 students, over 800 staff members, and our community of 35,000+ people. The board uses our mission and vision to guide us, and as we have been doing in the past, I would like to start today's meeting with revisiting these. Our mission is to create a culture of academic excellence through inclusive and innovative learning opportunities for the whole child, and our vision is to empower all learners to reach their full potential in a globally competitive world. With that, I would like to ask for a motion to approve the agenda, and we do have an addendum to the agenda, which the board will go back into executive session following the public session of our meeting.
So moved. Second.
Mrs. Weber?
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter?
Aye.
And Mr. Ballant?
Aye, the agenda is approved. I need a motion for the approval of the minutes.
So moved. Second.
Any comments, questions, corrections from the board? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bitter?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
And Mr. Ballant?
Aye, minutes are approved. Mrs. Weber, if you could give us a brief overview of the protocol for tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Ballant. Welcome to those of you who are here in our audience this evening, as well as those of you who are attending the meeting virtually. For those of you in our virtual audience, you can access tonight's agenda on the district website at sycamoreschools.org on the Board of Education page under notices, agendas, and minutes. Those minutes that were just approved from the January 4th meeting will also be posted out on this page. For those of you who wish to address the board in public participation this evening on non-agenda items, we ask that you please send your request to tonight's moderator, Mr. Christian Long at longc@sycamoreschools.org. He would also be the person that you would send requests to address the board for agenda items. If there are requests to talk to the board during an agenda item, that would be after the board has had their discussion on the item, after the motion has been introduced. One thing that you may note as you're listening to the board vote on items this evening is that Mr. Comerford and Dr. Steger are not in attendance in person this evening at the meeting. I believe Mr. Comerford is in our virtual audience this evening. Because of that, while he will be listening to the meeting, he might provide discussion, and I know that he has one report that he plans to give in the meeting. He is not allowed to vote on any items, make motions on any items per Ohio Revised Code. So just want to make you aware of their absence in terms of not being in person at the meeting this evening. So with that, I believe we are ready to get started, Mr. Ballant.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Weber. Mr. Lewis, I'll turn it over to you for a very special introduction.
So it is with great pleasure that I get to, I'll say, reintroduce our principal and assistant principal at Sycamore Junior High School. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit, and then I'm going to invite them to come up and just allow them to give you an overview over what they have accomplished in a very short period of time at Sycamore Junior High. So Mrs. Janelle Shunk and Mr. Greg Cole have both they both agreed during this crazy summer to serve as interim principal and assistant principal at Sycamore Junior High School. Very clearly, they both completed the interview process during the summer of 2022. And we had a commitment to the staff to return and just get feedback in early 2023 prior to doing any posting for the permanent positions. And I just wanted to share with you a little bit of feedback, not only about them, but about their colleague, Mr. Meyer, because really they have formed a very dynamic team in a very short period of time. Words like visibility, willingness to listen, relationship builders, positive climate builders, culture builders, humble and humility, working with you, dynamic leadership team, complement each other very well, always jumping in and helping wherever needed, and they've brought the fun back to the building. Always willing to help with difficult students. Many of the staff talked about them changing students and not being scared to do what is asked of other staff and being a collaborative, calming presence in the building. The one question that I asked this team, and I almost forgot to ask Mr. Meyer, because I was interviewing the two of Mr. Cole and Mrs. Shunk, and I really hadn't asked Mr. Meyer, did he want to stay with these two individuals? So it was a resounding yes, and he appreciated the fact that they continue to say they have a 10-year plan. And I know that's music to the ears of our board members that have experienced a lot of change at Sycamore Junior High. I did conduct one additional interview with each of the candidates just to not only inform them of what was the feedback, but to make sure that they were still on board, because the commitment to them was if they weren't having a good time, they could go back to the positions they were hired for. I will tell you that both Mrs. Shunk and Mr. Cole have not only met, but exceeded expectations in every area. And is with great pleasure that I would recommend that we tonight vote to remove the interim titles from them and make them the permanent principal and assistant principal at Sycamore Junior High. I can only say a big thank you to not only the staff, the students, but Mr. Meyer for helping us put these individuals to the test. Also appreciative that Mr. Meyer came in and accepted the challenge, because at one point he was the only administrator in the building this summer. But he has also excelled in his new role. So the picture on the screen is all you need to know to see that they have fun together. That was Flamingo Friday when they walked around the building dressed as flamingos and no explanation needed. So I would like to invite Mrs. Shunk and Mr. Cole up, and I'll give you the same instruction that my dear colleague, Mr. Long, would give you. Just make sure you push the button and turn it green so that you can share a little bit of perspective with the board on some of the things you've been doing at Sycamore Junior High.
Thank you, Chad, for that introduction. This picture is hilarious that was what we decided to go with. But it is very telling of who we are as a team. I just want to thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to share with you. We haven't spoken to you directly since the retreat. And so I just wanted to give you an update, hopefully knowing that the three of us are moving forward after the vote, and knowing that we're going to be able to provide consistency is really important to us. And so we just want to share with the board and with our community about what those plans look like. Our building goals this year were very broad because we came in not knowing the building. But we knew we had to increase collaboration among our staff and students. And we knew that we wanted to increase Tier 1 instruction. So the general classroom instruction that reaches 85% of our students. We wanted to really nail down what that looked like and what those experiences were for students in the classrooms. The way that we have started doing that and the way that we're continuing to do that next year is through a really heavy focus on our English curriculum. We are doing a lot of professional development with our English teachers. We are also working with their PLCs this year. We've actually, with Mr. Cole's help, drilled down to the specific items that those teachers need to focus on in their classrooms with their kids. And then we're doing tailored differentiated professional development with each English teacher to ensure that kids are getting instruction this year that is really solid and ahead of the curriculum alignment work that is happening. We are working on our master schedule for next year, and Chad tasked us with really intervening with the intervention system that we had in place, and then also trying to work in more collaboration time. And so we've been really strategic about how we can do that, whether it's through common planning time and just really trying to be strategic about our staffing. We started a lot of teacher committees this year, which has increased the collaboration. We're getting a lot of feedback from teachers. We've also started student committees. So we're looking forward to continuing that work. Looking at professional learning around instructional practices. And then our big push next year is that we're all having the same conversation. So we're starting to look at book studies that we can do with our staff. We're also aligning our department conversations and making sure that our departments are having department meetings. So we're all talking about the same thing. That's what we feel like is going to move us forward. So those are our building goals. The one thing that we talked about with you guys at the retreat was that we were really focusing on our vision too and our community values. Through that work, we finished it in December. We've tapped into every single stakeholder in the district that touches the junior high, and we arrived at connection, preparation, and experiences. So are we connecting students? Are we providing them with rigorous experiences? How are we preparing them for the future? So those are the things that we're really working on. I'm going to turn it over to Greg.
So my part is to talk a little bit about how we've done that this year. And, you know, early on in the year, we felt that the community connection, especially coming out of COVID, having access person to person with our families was very important. So even in spite of our parking challenges, we invited our families in for open house. We bussed our teachers in from the Green School just because we thought it was that important. Same thing with parent teacher conferences. Just again, a chance to have the parents and families come into the building, meet with our teachers face to face, and see the building that their students are learning in. And we thought that that was very important. We will also plan in the spring as we close up our historic junior high. We're going to have another event similar to what Green School did. And again, just one final chance to invite everybody. You know, we've got multi-generational families who've graduated from high school in that building. And so giving another chance to connect with our community in that way. We've collaborated with the PTO with Glowathon and Field Day to raise funds for our programs. We had a group of students who helped plan the field day. They pushed for that as a prize for fundraising, and they planned it. And it was just an example, again, of our student leadership. Two more of these groups, one of them, as we wrapped up field day and the Glowathon, they really wanted to have a junior high dance. And it had been a number of years since we'd had an evening junior high dance. And so this group of students, they planned it, they promoted it, they implemented it. They were the ones in every step of the way. And it was cool to watch them as you've worked with young people and see them in the stress of a leadership position as they implement an event. And they with flying colors, it was amazing. I have a final group of 8th graders who are trying to find a memorable way to end the school year as 8th graders. Mr. Lewis and I talked about, of course, their first idea involved like paint guns, right? Like and splashing paint everywhere. And so we'll find that happy buffer. You know, we really worked on connecting with other schools in the area. So obviously Green School and the high school to find alignment in policies and practices, but also working with the high school and making sure that our students feel welcome as they transition up. So Mr. Tilton came down and had a pep rally. Again, it's been a number of years since we had all 900 kids in the same room, yelling, screaming, learning the fight song, how to peel a banana. And it was like none of them had been in an auditorium together as a class before. And so we thought that that was a neat and unique experience. And then that evening, as a result of that, we had more than 50 junior high students who sat together near the student section because they wanted to be a part of it. And so the connection's a huge part of it. Obviously, Ms. Shunk dealt a lot with the preparation that we're providing, but we're just really excited to continue to move forward together as a staff and all the opportunities that our new building is going to provide.
Yeah. We recognize that this staff has had a lot of turnover, and you as a board, as a district team, have seen a lot of turnover in this building. So when we talk about the 10-year plan, it's not a joke. We fully believe that this community deserves some consistency in the building. And we're excited to be the team that provides that. I got a little bit teary-eyed hearing Chad talk about us because I said to Chad, like, we are lightning in a bottle. The three of us are, we work really well together and we care about kids. And we're just excited to move forward. I think when Chad came over and made the announcement to our staff, you could just see the room kind of like relax a little bit. So that was a really nice feeling as well. So thank you guys for this opportunity. We are very excited and we look forward to the future.
And I want to make sure I never get out in front of the board. That was Monday after the board agenda had already been published. So we'll make sure Tuesday, I'm sorry, not Monday on Martin Luther King Day, but Tuesday morning. So
I do want to thank the two of you for everything you've done. Stability is a word that comes to mind that we need at the junior high because we have seen a lot of turnover at the upper levels of leadership in that building. So as a parent, I can echo almost everything you guys have said. Obviously being a parent and hanging around with other friends that have kids the same age, just a great vibe in the community on the great things going on at the junior high. So outstanding job.
selfishly, Mrs. Shunk and Mr. Cole, I can't say from me, I don't have to conduct 2 more interviews this summer with large committees. So I really appreciate that. So, but I will tell you that from a community standpoint, from just a team standpoint, from the district team, like we couldn't be more pleased to have partners that we can work with and collaborate with. And just, we know that junior high is just that weird age, right? It's a weird age for our students and they're trying to figure things out. And that's why they need pink flamingos in their school. So excellent job. And we appreciate you.
Mr. Lewis, I think this is still you with Board of Education recognition.
Yes, it's always good to have School Board Recognition Month, January, which is fitting, right? You have your organizational meeting and then we recognize you for the great work that you do as school board members. So, we've done a few different things, but I thought it would be really cool to kind of like do our 2022 year in review. So it is fun. It's very exciting. Yeah, the whole year. I'm going to review the whole year, Mrs. Weber. And I'm going to do it briefly in 60 seconds. So thinking about the things that were, major accomplishments, the district achieved a 5-star rating under your leadership. 1 of 12 schools, districts in the state were able to achieve this honor. Sycamore was one of those 12. All 12 districts, when I looked at a ranking list, we were all tied at number 1. So there's something else that we can tout that we were number 1 on the ranking list. 1 of 3 school districts in Cincinnati area to achieve this honor. Fiscal stewardship continued to be a priority for this school board. 2016 operational levy was supposed to last 5 years to 2021, and here we are at the start of 2023, and we're not asking for new monies as of yet. The 2019 bond issue passage and the resulting construction are nearing completion, and that's under your leadership. E.H. Green Intermediate School opened for students for the first time, the new E.H. Green Intermediate School. And a new stadium, multi-use stadium opened for the community. Sims Elementary got a new stage and a completely renovated look to open for students, including a new early childhood wing. And then we know that Sycamore Junior High and Sycamore High School are nearing completion. So again, that's all under the board's leadership. You oversaw numerous staffing and leadership changes, as we just talked about, engaged in the development of the home team culture and allowed space for the district to grow in this area. You supported us in that work through numerous retreats and hours of meeting time. The strategic plan revision and implementation were completed and that work continues. We'll be bringing you an update very soon on that process. The curriculum review process, which was much needed, was completed under your leadership. So, listening to all those different things, I think on behalf of our district leadership team, which we call our flight team, on behalf of our building administrators, and certainly our staff and our students in our community, we just want to thank you for your time, your commitment, your partnership, your leadership, your compassion, your care and concern for our students and staff, as well as your dedication to serving the Sycamore Community School District. The time and the effort that board members put in to a district is unparalleled, and certainly the five of you represent that very well. As a token of our appreciation, we have a small gift for you. It will never be enough to encompass the number of hours and the number of commitments that you do. I don't think people realize the number of committees and things if they didn't listen to the organizational meeting that you do and serve on. So I can say on behalf of our team, we thank you for everything you do and your unwavering support of our school district. So Mrs. Weber, if you don't mind passing their gifts down, and I'll get you your certificates as well. So. And we will get Dr. Steger and Mr. Kama for their wonderful gifts, but there won't be any surprise left if they watch the.
I'm on and thank you, Chad.
Thank you.
OSBA also.
Oh, well, I've. Fun man. Do I get a new one every like 20 minutes?
Must have been reversed alphabetically.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Mrs. Weber? Did you want to get a picture?
Nope. No damage.
Again, thank you very much. Moving on to public participation, Mr. Long, nothing, Mrs. Weber, nothing. We'll move on to the superintendent's agenda. I need a motion for the approval of the 2024-25 calendar.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Lewis?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. So I did want to point out, there were multiple revisions that we went through with the school calendar, and certainly we take a lot of feedback. We take a lot of time, a lot of collaboration. We certainly spend time, and I know Mrs. Wagner spent lots of time working with our SEA president just to vet each of the situations, because we just don't always know every situation that might be an impact to our teaching staff. But we certainly work hard to try to strike a balance between maximizing our student instructional days and then providing breaks for all students and staff. So what I wanted to bring to you is that the district administrative team is recommending option number 3 to be approved as the 24-25 calendar, and just give you the following reasons. And, again, that balance between instructional days and breaks is important. And when I think about our strategic plan that centers around wellness and self-care for our staff members, having a number of balanced breaks throughout the calendar is certainly important. So, option number 3 gives the staff and students a full week off at Thanksgiving, 2 weeks off at winter break, and 1 week off at spring break. And as we discussed with Mrs. Grace, this seemed to be the calendar when we discussed with her that had the greatest support. And I believe she recommended to Mrs. Wagner as well. Our model of professional learning, we don't just have selected days throughout the calendar anymore where we do professional learning. Really, professional learning is ongoing throughout the year. We believe in a continuous learning model and provide high quality professional learning for our teachers throughout the year. And what that looks like is our teachers spend a great deal of time collaborating, having common plan time, even before and after school doing that professional learning. We place a high value on the number of instructional days to ensure that all of our students reach their full potential in a globally competitive world. We went back and looked at the number of days, instructional days. Pre-COVID, 16, 17, 17, 18, we were at 176 and 177. Obviously, our COVID years were difficult, but post-COVID, due to construction, we've been at 174, and that's with personal learning days. I will tell you that I had a number of people reach out and ask that the personal learning days go away and be sunsetted. And so the 24-25 calendar does not include any professional or personal learning days for students. This calendar created, I'm sorry, we've already talked about the collaboration with SEA and hearing from teachers. I have not received any concerns from staff members. I know I will tell you that most community members have reached out and supported option number 3. I did receive and get some feedback from some, I believe the board received a few inquiries about option number 3 being way too early to start school. I had not received any, but overall it has received the most universal support. I did go back and look to see how early we have started school. We typically have started school, at least in the last, I'll say 7 to 8 years, around August 15th, August 16th, 14th. We even had a year where we were going to start on the 10th. I think people have gotten, unfortunately, used to, we've been starting late August because we've, again, tried to squish that calendar for construction. So the last 3 years, we've started the 25th, the 22nd, and the 21st. So this does return us back to I'll say an early mid-August start. But I think, again, covering, it doesn't matter where you put the days, but the days have to go somewhere to maintain 176 to 177 instructional days. And I think that's something we value tremendously. So what I can say is going forward after the 24-25 calendar, we will make sure that that's as balanced as we can get it so that we have that, I'll say mid to early August start. And I think people value the kind of late May exit from the district. So it does leave some significant time for staff to be off and recharge and get away before returning for the next calendar year. So those are the pieces that are a little bit unusual. I'm happy to take any questions from the school board, but again, we are recommending option number 3 to move forward at this point.
Yeah,
Mr.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to thank you very much for pulling some of those start dates over kind of the last few years, just so that we had a better sense of it. And I appreciate Mrs. Wegner and staff who put all their time and energy into this and working collaboratively to come up with a calendar. Thank you.
I have a statement that Dr. Steger would like for me to read regarding the calendar. And then I will start with my own general comment before I read hers. We did receive some feedback about the earlier start dates for childcare for some of our staff. And I would appreciate, I do appreciate not having to like redo all of this because this was a ton of work and we've been through this, but I would appreciate for future years that we always consider the number of families that we have who work here and trying our best. And I know you probably did this, just saying it out loud, to align our start dates to similar times with other districts so that for the childcare issue, if that seems to be an issue for staff, which we have been notified that it has. So that's my piece. And I am in support of this
calendar, even though I'm saying that. Okay. All right. So I'll read, this is Dr. Seeger. Thank you for listening to these comments in my absence. I fully support option 4 for the calendar. It puts an emphasis on giving students needed, quote, brain breaks while our faculty and staff can focus on vertical and horizontal alignment throughout the district. As you are aware, across our district and the region, we have been encountering a substitute teacher shortage. As a result, our teachers, administrators, and staff members have been responsible for covering classes for teachers and educational assistants who are sick. With the added weight of combining classes because of the shortage and covering classes during planning periods, teachers no longer have professional learning time during the regular school year. Without planning periods and with combined classes, our educators need the extra time built into the calendar so that they can meet across subject areas, across grade levels, and across buildings. It would greatly benefit the district for our educators to have professional learning time built into the calendar throughout the academic year. As an extra note, planning periods are not supposed to be used for professional learning. During this time, teachers are preparing lessons, grading papers, checking in with parents, running their mailboxes, making copies, double checking student service devices, et cetera. Our educators would need time to work together, and they do also meet one another before and after school. Students are tired, but they are diligently meeting their requirements in class. They are diligently meeting state standards, school standards, family standards, and they're taking a lot of tests in different areas like COGAT, MAP, air testing, PSAT, ACT, midterms, and finals. By relieving some of this pressure on our students, they can return to their classes a bit more refreshed and ready to tackle the next big challenge. A few days off for professional learning will allow students to have much needed brain breaks throughout the school year. It is important to focus on the children and not on test scores. As a district, we'll benefit from well-rested students and educators with focused professional learning days sprinkled throughout the year. I would like to say that I believe it is the quality of time in the classroom, not the quantity of time in the classroom. End quote.
Yeah, I would just like to add a couple comments as well. I did receive several emails of concern on option 4 about the additional burden this would place on working parents with younger kids if we went with option 4, where there were additional days off in the school district. That's probably the most emails or conversations that I had from community members. And then, the other comment that I would make is like Mr. Lewis said, we did receive some emails from teachers. They weren't from community members, but were from our teaching staff concerned about option number 3 and the start dates. So those are my comments. Anything else from the board?
Mr. Ballin, I would just like to thank the board for the engagement, and, I think we had some great dialogue around the calendar. I wish that we could create a calendar that everyone fell in love with. We do our best to try to navigate all the different pieces, from having exams before winter break to, whatever the case may be that we think is best instructionally. We try to bring it all together to create a calendar that can be supported. So, I really appreciate the discussion of the board, because I think overall, hopefully it brought us to a calendar that at least there was some consensus around. And even though we don't all agree, I do think it was a great dialogue to get to and vet out some of those things that we need to discuss at times. So really appreciate that.
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballin.
Aye. The motion for the 2024 calendar is approved. I need a motion for the approval of the Seeger Stadium gift agreement.
So moved.
Second.
And this is just an agreement with Mark and Sandra Seeger for the soccer lacrosse stadium naming rights moving forward for a period of 10 years.
I just have one question, and I apologize, Mrs. Weber, for not reaching out to you beforehand. On page 2, on section D on signage, the last sentence reads, "This agreement does not restrict or limit the school from having other signage inside the auditorium." Is it supposed to say auditorium, or is?
No, I believe that should say inside the stadium. So
So
let me make
Soccer
that
stadium.
correction.
Yeah.
can Mrs. Bitter and Mrs. Weiss, you're okay with making that change with your motions?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, we said that in unison. Will said yes.
Anything else from the board?
Mr. Ballant, I just would like to say again, thank you to Mark and Sandra Seeger and their family for, again, generously supporting our school district and our student athletes. And, you know, we certainly could not do some of the facility things that we are doing without their fantastic support. So
Great. I would agree. Thank you to the Seeger family. Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the authorization to issue RFQ for design professional services for improvements to the extracurricular athletic facilities at Sycamore High School.
So moved.
Second.
I almost feel like I'm dipping back into my old ways when I hear RFQs and design professional services, but Mr. Lovell is working collaboratively with Mrs. Weber. It is time that we need to do an RFQ, and essentially an RFQ is a request for qualifications to have design professionals submit their qualifications for us to consider to partner with us on these additional athletic facilities. We did not have a contract with SHP for locker room facilities, for the baseball, softball facility. So it is time for us to look at these qualifications and make a decision that we think is the best partner for these projects. So your authorization will allow Mr. Lovell to publish a notice and have these be submitted, and then we would bring back a recommendation to you with a contract with a price to hire them for these professional services.
But at this point, this is just a request for quotation for services. There's no cost associated
Nope.
with or anything like that.
Well, the only cost associated is us publishing it in a newspaper. So, but other than that, no.
Any questions from the board? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the change orders for Sycamore High School renovation project GMP number 2.
So moved.
Second.
Another deduct, which is nice. Any questions from the board?
The only thing I will point out, this was the deduct change order that we promised at last meeting when we talked about the natatorium project.
Thank you for that clarification, Mrs. Weber. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the change order schools in Sycamore Junior High, High School, and EH Green Intermediate Furniture.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions from the board? Mrs. Weber?
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the 23-24 preschool tuition rate.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber? Any comments?
This is just a recommendation. We are getting ready to start our lottery for our preschool program. The annual tuition of $32.50 a year is a $50 per year increase over what we're currently charging. It is charged to our students who are typical students within the preschool program, not our students with disabilities. We are going to be, we are continuing to implement our expanded preschool program because of the additional space at Sims Elementary for preschool. And I believe we estimate that we could have up to 92 students in the typical classroom spots in addition to our students with disabilities. So nice expansion for our community for our preschool program.
And this would be waived for students with free and reduced?
It is not considered waived because we do not have a mandate by the state that we have to do that like we do for our full day kindergarten program. One of the things that we have discussed is potentially having a sliding scale included for our students who would have socioeconomic needs. We have not determined how we would do that moving forward. So if that's something that the board would like for us to consider, we could look at that potentially either for next year or to bring back an amendment to the board. But at this point in time, because it's not mandated by the state, we discontinued our practice, which is charging for all preschool programs. Just to keep in mind, though, we also, for this year anyway, have a Head Start program that supports many of our students who may have socioeconomic needs for a preschool program.
I mean, I do have an interest in that. If there were students that wanted to participate in preschool, but were unable to get a spot in Head Start, I think preschool is extremely important for all children. So it's something that we should invest in for our district, because it will come back to us in future years, of course, for our students to succeed. So I just have an interest in learning more. I don't know how to begin that conversation, but just to understand if there is a sliding scale option for some time in the future.
Well, let me make this suggestion. The lottery is from January 23rd through the 17th. I would like to be able to have the board move forward with approving the full rate of tuition so that we have that information available for our families as they're getting ready to go into the process. We can bring back to you a recommendation at our February morning meeting for potential sliding scale. If that would be something that would be of interest to the board, even looking at the process for next year, because that would give time for us to be able to provide that information to families looking at the lottery.
Yes, I would like to see it brought back as well. So let's put that on. Let's put that in for the February morning meeting. Thank you, Mrs. Weber. And then Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter, aye, and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the purchase of secondary student Chromebooks.
Second,
Few quick updates on this. This is a little bit earlier than we typically will bring Chromebooks to you. The reason that we're doing that is we're actually taking advantage of a model that's being phased out. Kind of like when you're buying a car, we're buying last year's model. That is significant savings to the district. And it's the same model that we purchased for the past 2 years. So we have that consistency with the devices. We've had great success with the devices. So we're going to continue with that model. We got 8 quotes on this, and our partner DCTS worked really hard to get that number down for us. And compared to the order that we placed last year, same devices, same cases, same warranty, we're saving about $75,000. So it's worth it to take advantage of that savings to bring this earlier than we typically do. And we're going to have those Chromebooks in place for our students and not have to wait and worry about them coming in on time.
No, thank you to you and your staff for looking at all the opportunities to save money. That's significant savings for the district. So thank you. Mrs. Weber?
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter, aye, and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the memorandum of understanding with OPSI number 243, transportation incentives.
so moved.
Second,
Any comments? Ms.?
Just as we discussed, this is some items that our team worked through in collaboration with OPSI, and just really trying to find ways that we can better support our transportation department with, just being creative and trying to find new employees. Bus drivers, as we know, is a shortage not only in Ohio, but across the nation. So Mrs. Weber and Mr. Lovell and the rest, Miss Dr. Davis and the rest of the team did a great job collaborating with OPSI to try to get this done. So Mrs. Weber, I don't know if you have any additional comments.
Just that we'll need to spend some time making sure that we communicate this program so that the incentives can work to secure additional transportation employees.
I know it's not directly related to this, but I would just like them to comment on the commercial that the district put out, recruiting additional staff, and thank Dr. Davis and the entire administrative staff that worked on this. It was very well done, and hopefully we see some results and get some increase in our applicants. So thank you to them.
Just as a follow-up to the transportation, how does the district advertise? How do we do that, Mrs. Weber or Mr. Lewis?
I would say a multitude of ways. Social media, our normal postings, not only the state and local, like transportation groups that Mr. Miller belongs to. He uses his own personal social media website. Really, and we post like large banners out on the fence on Reed Hartman. It just really nothing we have done to this point has really brought in. And it's kind of a signal of a lot of the job market. Bus driving is a tough job. And we're just having trouble getting candidates in. I think some of these incentives will help solve some of our problems because we've had people walk in and say, hey, if you could figure out a way to help me get on staff now, like I would be willing to drive a bus, or I'd be willing to leave. Not that I want to go plucking people from other districts, but they're willing to leave their job at another district to come here if they could be guaranteed, and they call it guaranteed a route or something like that. So some of the incentives that we've been able to work through give us a little bit extra of that authority to do things. But, all the different ways that we advertise just haven't been extremely successful right now in the current environment.
I think one of our strongest ways of recruiting is just word of mouth from our current employees. And if this gives an additional incentive and additional tools for our own employees to be able to get people to come and work with us, I think it's a great start to try to get more employees into the district. I think word of mouth is probably, in particular for our classified staff, one of our best tools in recruiting people.
Thank you.
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mr. Ballant.
Aye. Motion passes. Mr. Lewis, other.
The only thing I have is just like to wish our students the best of luck in semester number 2. Can't believe half the year is already over, and congratulations on the completion of first semester, and look forward to all the fun activities in semester 2.
Thank you very much. Moving on to treasurer's consent agenda. I need a motion for the approval of the treasurer's consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber?
As you can see, we have a very robust list of donations this evening that we're asking you to accept from those that we've received for our Always an Aviator campaign, a number of scholarships, and a donation from our PTO. Lori Simon Goldman, who is a member of our Business Advisory Council, who's provided a donation. And then also just want to thank the Arietta family, who have made a significant donation in support of our vocal music program. So a very long and exciting list of donations that are supporting all of our students throughout the district. Are there any questions?
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Weber, second quarter updates, fiscal year 2023.
Okay, thank you so much. Halfway through the year, and Mr. Long, if you go to the next slide, just want to give you a quick update on some of the highlights of the second quarter being from October through December, our master facility plan, ongoing information about our child nutrition plan from a financial standpoint. We do have our fiscal year 22 comprehensive financial report completed and available, and then just a quick overview of what's coming up next quarter. So if you go ahead, Mr. Long. From our second quarter standpoint, I always like to make sure that in looking at our overall financial parameters for the fiscal year, give an update to the board on our general fund and other items that may be of interest. In looking at our 5-year forecast and our planned expenditure trends, and as well as our revenue projections, we are in line with projections through this point in the year on both revenue expenses. We are continuing to look at ways to reduce the trend on the expenditure side. We've been hit by many of the things that most companies are being hit with, in that we have inflationary costs, as well as one of the things that we are also looking at is enrollment growth. So when we get to what's up in the third quarter, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But for those guidelines that were put into place for this school year, we are within line of projection for revenue and expense. Next item, as far as bond payments, December 1st is when the vast majority of principal and interest payments are due for our bonded debt for the district for all of our different projects over the years. We did make approximately $8 million in principal and interest payments in December, of which about $5 million of that was actually paying down our principal debt. So making some progress on that, but we will actually in this next year pay off our 1998 debt, but chipping away at all of those others, including our 2019 debt. And then finally, in looking at our second quarter update, we did receive notification, and we discussed this a bit at the last tax budget hearing in our last meeting. We did receive our tax rate that will be collected from our residents and businesses in this upcoming year. And Mr. Long, if you could go to the next slide. I just want to remind the board that our tax rate, and this is for residential taxpayers within our district, we are still have a low rate in comparison to other school districts in Hamilton County of what is paid for our schools. We currently rank 21st out of 25th out of 25 school districts in Hamilton County, and we also include Kings and Mason, who are our neighboring districts in Warren County. So at about 34 and a half mils for this year, we are about 9 mils below the average for that comparison group. The highest is right around 60 mils. So still a very good rate in comparison to other districts here in Hamilton County. Okay, are there any questions before I go on to the master facility plan update? Yeah, all right, Mr. Long. Okay, and I believe you actually commented on this a little bit, Mr. Ballant, but we are getting, or maybe it was Mr. Lewis, as he was talking about things we've accomplished. And we are getting near the end of getting at least the budget completed for all of our master facility plan projects. We're right around 98% of our budget either obligated or expended on our master facility plan. So those dollars that our community provided to us, we are putting into place. We are implementing that investment that they've made. So really the only things that are left are miscellaneous project contingencies for those projects that have not yet been complete. We do not have some of our Always an Aviator projects included in the current budget. We do not at this point in time have funding included in the budget for the baseball softball project and for phase 2 of the multi-purpose stadium projects. But for those that are included, 98% of the budget has been either under contract or has been expended. So nearing the finish line on all of those projects. Any questions on that before we move on to the next item? All right. Okay, I want to give you an update on child nutrition. A couple of years ago during COVID, we were really concerned because of what was a drawdown of reserves that our child nutrition department had been able to accumulate over the years because of COVID, lower number of students in our schools because we had the virtual classrooms. And also then a three-month period where we did not have any students in our building. So child nutrition department has, very fortunately for us, always been self-supporting. And after last year, they were able to reverse all those trends because of support of a federal free and reduced lunch and breakfast programs. one of the things that came with that was that every student in our district was able to access free lunch. And so that really provided an incentive for our students to utilize our child nutrition programs. And the federal government, through the Department of Agriculture, they reimbursed us for those costs. So we were able to rebuild our budget and rebuild our cash reserves in the child nutrition program and department. One of the concerns that Mrs. Warren had was once those free lunches went away, what might happen? And I'm really pleased to report that as through at least the first half of the school year, we're right at a break even for the child nutrition department. I don't know that everybody stayed that was eating free lunch before, but I know that enough are continuing to participate that she's able to be self-sustaining still and continues to have a cash balance that allows us to do some things. I know she's made some investments in the master facility plan above and beyond what was already in the bond issue and has enough cushion that we can continue to look at providing, really moderately priced meals, particularly in today's environment with inflationary costs of food. So really kudos go out to her for what she's been able to do with that. So glad to report that we're still doing well in the child nutrition program. Any questions there? Okay, next slide, Mr. Long. Our annual comprehensive financial report is done, including in print. So at 138 pages, exciting reading. We do have them in print, but we also, the easiest way is to go out to the treasurer's page on the district website where you can access an electronic copy. I do want to give a big thank you to Mrs. Amy Moore, the assistant treasurer, who really leads the development of the financial report and also works through the audit of that financial report. And Mr. Comerford's going to give an update on that in a little bit, but a big thanks to her for keeping all of that organized, providing the information needed to be able to make this a reality. So thank you so much, Amy. But again, and you all got your copy. Mr. Comerford and Dr. Stiegel will get them a copy as well. Okay. Any questions? All right. So finally, what's up in third quarter, just so you know the things that are coming. As far as revenue sources, as y'all know, property taxes are the major revenue source for our district. The county treasurer's office has released the second half, the second half for us in terms of our fiscal year's tax bills. Those payments are due by January 31st by our residents and our corporate taxpayers. We're going to start receiving advance payments on those come next week. So we'll be able to start monitoring collection. It typically takes until about April until we see the final collection of our property taxes, but we'll continue to keep you aware of how those are coming in comparison to our projection for the year. So thank you to all of our taxpayers for paying your tax bills. And if you have any questions, the best way to go about that is to contact the county treasurer, since they are responsible for collection of taxes. Next up, and I know Mrs. Weiss will talk about this probably a bit as she's giving her legislative update, but it is a state budget year and we will be, I'm sure, very involved with our legislators. Mrs. Bitter also joining that group with us in working with our legislators. I know that you'll help us as well in the process and making sure our local legislators are aware of the impact of their work on Sycamore, not only from budgetary standpoint, but in many times the budget ends up having a lot of other things in it that aren't necessarily budget related that do have an impact on education. So we look forward to the governor probably releasing that and likely in February in the next couple of weeks, and our work beginning on that. We have a financial retreat coming up March 1st, and I know we have a lot of work to do with the board in looking at not only next year's budget, but also thinking about long-term planning for not only for our operating budget, but also continued monitoring of our capital improvement budget as well. And then finally, just from an operational standpoint, I know that we are going to be working quite a bit. And actually, the process is beginning next week with our building administrators, our department administrators on planning for the budget for the 23-24 school year. So lots going on in the next couple of months. We will keep you abreast of what happens as we get through the process. So any questions?
Thank you, Mrs. Weber.
All right.
I need a motion for the approval of the financial reports December 2022.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions?
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, the reports are approved. I need a motion for the approval of the 2023 IRS mileage rate.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. I need a motion for the approval of the personnel consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I'd just like to comment on Mr. Fritz's retirement. I want to thank him for 29 years leading our technology department here at Sycamore. And if you really think about what's evolved in technology over the last 29 years, we're going back to 1993 when he started, and what he's done for this district and what his staff has done for this district to ensure that our students and our staff have the what was his words? Cutting edge, not bleeding edge, technology in our district has been incredible. All of our students now have access to Chromebooks, and it's just phenomenal, the technology advances that have happened in his career. So I want to thank him for his longevity, dedication to Sycamore, and the significant contributions he's made both to technology and to education in our district. Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. Moving on to other Board of Education business, I need a motion for the approval of the Hamilton County Tax Incentive Review Council representative.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions from the board? Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
and Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. Mrs. Weiss or Mrs. Bitter, I don't know who's giving the legislative liaison to.
Mrs. Weiss is going to give it, and then I'm going to learn from Mrs. Weiss, and then I'll do it.
Yeah.
We'll probably rotate.
Sure, yeah, we're definitely going to rotate. So as Mrs. Weber indicated, this is a state budget year. We anticipate impact on education. They anticipate a release in February, and then our work will begin to see how we will be possibly impacted. We will work closely with our legislators to share the Sycamore perspective, and we are currently scheduling meetings with those state legislators. Couple updates we wanted to provide you with. House Bill 458, Governor Mike DeWine signed into law. This bill eliminates the August special election, except in instances where the election would be to nominate or elect candidates for the U.S. House of Representatives, or if a school district is under fiscal emergency. The bill also allows a school district whose entire territory is located within the congressional district that is on the August ballot to put certain levies on the ballot. This bill also makes changes to election law, including voter identification, specifically mandating photo ID, absentee voting, in-person voting, and drop boxes. So it's worth taking a look at that if you have a moment. Senate activity and Senate Bill 1. This is a pretty significant bill. This bill would rename the Department of Education as the Department of Education and Workforce and would create the position of the Director of Education and Workforce. The bill would reform the functions and responsibilities of the State Board of Education and the Superintendent of Public Instruction. This bill would give the governor power over the appointment of this director, opposed to the voters of the state of Ohio. In addition, this bill would prohibit any rules or requirements be placed on non-public schools as well as rules regarding home education and school attendance. Currently, the Ohio Constitution provides that there must be a state board of education and a superintendent of public instruction who is appointed by the state board. The selection in terms of the members of the state board, as well as the powers and duties of the state board and superintendent, must be prescribed by law. Now, the voting membership of the State Board of Education is 19 members. 11 are elected from specified electoral districts, and 8 are appointed by the governor. The Senate Education Committee has sponsored testimony scheduled for this week. This particular Senate bill was also introduced in the last session, and there would be significant changes, I think, to what we could do as a district and how our Department of Education in the state of Ohio would work. It would become much more partisan than it is now. That's all I have. So thank you. If anyone has any questions. No, okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Mrs. Bitter, you said you have a Sycamore Advisory Commission
Yes.
update from Dr. Steger.
Yes. I'm going to read Dr. Steger's update from the meeting. SAC met on Monday, the 9th of January in the district office. Of note are the following. We had a wonderful student update from our 2 outstanding high school students, Tanvi and Elijah. They shared their own personal accomplishments, which are quite impressive, as well as some of the topics that the high school students discuss in their AVES group. These topics are student-teacher relationships, dress codes, tardiness, cell phone policies, diversity and inclusion, college stress, student workload, safety, and security. At the February SAC meeting, we will be having presentations by 2 different groups. The first one is the bylaws committee. They're going to be updating the bylaws. And the second will be the calendar committee. They will be creating a calendar that takes into account different cultural, religious celebrations.
Thank you very much. I believe Mr. Comerford is online to give us an update on the audit liaison update. So thank you, Mr. Comerford.
Can you hear me, Mr. Ballot?
I can, yes, thank you.
Excellent. I want to start by commending Mrs. Weber and Mrs. Moore and the entire staff that was involved in the audit. I had the chance to talk with state audits department and state auditors, and they were it was about the most positive commentary I have ever heard from an audit about the review process. And I'm gonna just take a moment. There is the audit itself is published on our website, but I want to take a moment to highlight a couple of things from the official report that go behind my comments here. So on the audit report, which is the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting on compliance and other matters required by the government auditing standards. On page 4, I'd like to highlight under from Keith Faber, the auditor of state, the final sentence on the report on compliance. The results of our test disclosed no instances of non-compliance or other matters that are required to be reported under government auditing standards. Secondly, on the section of the report on compliance for major federal programs, in the second paragraph of that document on page 5 of the auditor's report, in our opinion, Sycamore Community City School District complied in all material respects with the compliance requirements referred to above that could have a direct and material effect on its major federal program for the year ended June 30th, 2022. And the last thing I wanted to highlight is the schedule of findings. And there's 3 sections to this. And from the summary of auditor's results, first question, were there any material weaknesses in internal controls reported at the financial statement level? No. Secondly, were any significant deficiencies in internal controls reported at the financial statement level? The answer was no. Third, was there any reported material noncompliance at the financial statement level? The answer was, again, no. Were there any material weaknesses in the internal controls reported for major federal programs? The answer was, again, no. Were there any significant deficiencies in internal controls reported for major federal programs? Again, the answer was no. And most remarkable is section 2 and 3. Findings related to the financial statements required to be reported in accordance with GAGAS, none. Findings and question costs for federal awards, none. You honestly just cannot get a cleaner audit report than we have gotten for the year ending June 30th of 2022. And again, my commendation to Mrs. Weber and Mrs. Moore and their staffs for just an outstanding audit this year.
Thank you, Mr. Comerford. Next up is PTO visits.
Before we move on, if I could just make a comment.
Sorry.
You know, I would like to say again, a thank you to Mrs. Moore. Thank you to the treasurer's office staff. But also thank you to, you know, people who work in the departments, who follow the compliance standards, who work with us with all of our rules and regulations, which are sometimes not the most exciting thing to either talk about or to follow. But we have people who work in each of the buildings to help make sure that we're in compliance, to be our eyes and ears out there. And so we just want to thank them as well. I know Mrs. Moore would join me in that sentiment. So this isn't one of those things, it's the treasurer's audit, the assistant treasurer's audit. It really is for those people who work with us in the building every day to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to really make sure that our community knows we're accountable for their tax dollars, and we take that responsibility very, very seriously, and we'll continue to do that. I do think, and I'm trying to remember, Mr. Comerford, but I do think that one of the outcomes of having this kind of audit is that we will receive Auditor Faber's award with distinction this year for our audit for the 21-22 school year. So we're excited to get that award again. We had a year off, but we're going to be bringing that back this year. So thank you, Mr. Comerford, for your work with the committee, and we're working on it this year again. So
yeah, and I would echo everything that Mrs. Weber said, and I would maybe add that these results don't come by accident. It is the control measures and the professionalism of the treasurer's office and the entire district that make this happen. So thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much. PTO visits, I did reach out to all the PTO presidents, I think end of last week or over the weekend. I did hear back from 3 of them. Mapledale, E.H. Green, and junior high have informed me of when the meetings are. I will send the schedule out to the board so that we can then discuss who's available on these dates. And I will follow up with the remaining 4 PTOs and hopefully get on their calendars as well. And then
I just want to make sure you don't adjourn before I say something. I have one last thing.
that's fine. And then there is Business Advisory Council that meets next week on January 25th. So I will follow up with a report following that meeting.
And this is not just on the agenda, but I actually am still on the steering committee for Sycamore Bridges, and we had our meeting today. So because we had it today, and I just wanted to let you know as a board that, you know, our Sycamore Bridges and obviously our Operation Give Back are 2 extremely important organizations for our school district, for our kids, for our students and families. And I just to let you know, they're working really hard. I ask them both every time because they're always at the meetings. I just say, what are your biggest needs? And for Operation Give Back, although it wasn't an Operation Give Back meeting, their biggest need still is food. They have a pantry and they need that pantry stocked. And these are people in our community that need, there's a significant amount of food shortage in our community. And the other for Sycamore Bridges is rent. The rent costs are going up in our community very high. So that's been their biggest need. And then just a couple of last little things. If you are interested in these organizations, please go to their websites and you can sign up and volunteer. For Sycamore Bridges, they really would like to add to their subscriber email base. So yes, they love it that people like them on Facebook and on social media, but when you get your email on their list, they will let you know via email what their needs are, and they only send emails for when they need something, and they will not sell your email or do anything with it. But this is something that's very important to them. And then the last thing I'll say is they would like more participation from the PTOs. They're going to reach out to PTOs and see if one member of every school's PTO would like to be on that steering committee too. And I think that's an excellent idea. So when we have our PTO meetings, let's always remember just to do a shout out for those two. Although most people know it, let's still do it. And final last word, if there are needs, teachers, administrators, anyone in this community, if there are needs, you can reach out. You can be like an advocate and tell Sycamore Bridges, and they can maybe fulfill that need. And we need to constantly be telling our communities and our staff that if there's a need, they might think they might be modest and not want to ask for something. They can ask Sycamore Bridges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bitter. I need a motion to go back into executive session per ORC 121.22G1.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Weber, please call the roll.
Mrs. Weiss,
Aye.
Mrs. Bitter,
Aye.
Mr. Ballant.
Aye, motion passes. So this will end the public session, the public portion of our meeting. We will not be coming out with any vote. So thank you for joining us.